I'm 7 months pregnant, and I've been with Remy for 2 years and 4 months, and I have never cheated on him, not once, not even in my thoughts. Yet 4 days ago at his family's 4th of July barbecue, in front of around 50 people including his parents, his aunts and uncles, his cousins, his friends, and strangers I didn't even recognize, he stood up with a beer in his hand and announced that he was finally going to get a DNA test because he was tired of wondering if this baby was even his since, in his words, I'm that type of girl. And now I'm sitting in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house trying to understand how my life went from planning a nursery to this point. So let me back up because I know how this goes and the full picture matters. I met Remy about 2.5 years ago at a friend's birthday event when Freya, who I've known since middle school, turned 28 and rented out part of a downtown bar. And Remy was there because he knew Freya's boyfriend, Bradford, through a recreational sports league they played in together, and we talked most of the night. He was funny and cute and actually remembered details about things I said, which felt rare because most guys I'd dated before him listened like a brick wall. So we exchanged numbers, started texting, went on our first date 2 weeks later, and for the first year and a half things were genuinely good, the kind of good where you think you've found your person. He met my parents. Around 6 months in, I met his family around the same time. His mom Valerie was always a bit cold toward me, but Remy said she was like that with everyone, so I didn't take it personally. His dad Franklin was nice enough but quiet and stayed in the background, and his younger sister Chelsea, who was 23, and I actually got along fine. She commented on my Instagram posts and we talked at family dinners, nothing deep but friendly, and about 14 months into dating Remy and I moved in together, got a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent area, split the rent, and started building what I thought was a real life together, because I truly believed we were solid and headed toward engagement. Especially since he made comments about rings, about wanting kids someday, about seeing a future with me, all the things you want to hear, and then I got pregnant, which wasn't planned because I was on birth control, but apparently I'm one of those statistics, and when I told Remy he was shocked. At first, which I expected, and we sat on the couch while he stared at the wall for about 10 minutes before saying, okay, we can do this, we'll figure it out, and for a few weeks he seemed genuinely excited, looking at cribs online, talking about names, telling his family before I was even ready because he was so hyped. But then something shifted around month 3, starting with small comments, like asking who I was texting when we were out, and I'd show him my phone because I had nothing to hide, and he'd nod but still have this look on his face, and he started asking about my day in a way that felt less like interest and more like interrogation. Where did you go? Who did you see? What time did you get home? Why didn't you answer my text for 40 minutes? And I kept telling myself it was just anxiety about becoming a dad, first-time parent nerves. So I tried to be patient and reassuring and even offered him access to my phone location, which he accepted, thinking if it made him feel better then fine, but it didn't, and around month 4 I found out about the group chat. Because Remy has this group of friends, about 8 guys he's known since high school plus a few more added over the years, all in a chat called The Boys that I knew about since it constantly popped up on his phone with sports talk, weekend plans, and dumb memes, and one night Remy fell asleep on the couch with his phone unlocked on his chest, and I wasn't snooping at all. I just moved it to the coffee table so it wouldn't fall and crack, but as I picked it up a message came through from his friend Justin saying, "Bro, any updates on the situation?" And something in my gut just knew. So I stood there for 2 full minutes debating what to do because this was the father of my child, the man I lived with, the person I trusted completely, and then I opened the chat, and what I read made me sit down on the floor because my leg literally stopped working, because there was an entire thread from about 3 weeks earlier where Remy had told all 15 guys in that chat that he was pretty sure I cheated on him and that the baby probably wasn't his, saying I was that type of girl, even though I still don't know what that means because I have never given him a single reason to believe that. And he claimed he noticed I'd been acting different since getting pregnant. He said I was too calm about the whole thing, which to him apparently meant I was hiding something. And then it got worse because those 15 guys, including his own brother Hank who I'd had dinner with multiple times, had created an actual poll titled Who She Really Slept With options that included Remy's brother, 3 of my male co-workers whose names he only knew because I'd mentioned them casually, some guy named Harold who I genuinely had to think about for 5 full minutes before remembering he was a friend's husband I'd met once at a game night, and an option that just said random Tinder hookup, and all 15 guys voted, some of them even voting multiple times as a joke, with comments like my money's on the coworker office affairs and classic, and nah Hank definitely hit that. which Hank himself responded to with laughing emojis, and "Y'all are wild, but I wouldn't put it past her." His own brother joking about sleeping with me and participating in a poll about the paternity of my baby like it was fantasy football. And I sat on that floor until my legs went numb while Remy slept through it all, actually snoring, which felt like such a slap in the face. Him sleeping peacefully while I learned he'd been telling everyone I knew that I was a cheater and a liar. And when I woke him up he immediately knew something was wrong because apparently my face looked scary. So I asked him directly what the group chat was about, and he tried to grab his phone first, which told me everything. And when I held it away he started making excuses, saying it wasn't serious, that they were just joking, that guys talk like that and I wouldn't understand. So I asked him if he genuinely believed the baby wasn't his, and he couldn't even look at me. He turned his head and stared at the TV that wasn't even on. And when I asked again he said he didn't know, that something just felt off, that I'd been weird lately, that he had a right to his feelings. And when I asked him to give me one specific example, one piece of evidence, one moment that made him suspicious, he couldn't answer and just kept repeating that it was a feeling, a vibe I'd never understand because I wasn't in his position. And we fought until 3 in the morning with me crying and him getting defensive and nothing being resolved. Him telling me I was overreacting and that if I hadn't snooped I wouldn't have found it. Accusing me of violating his privacy even though the messages were about me and our baby, and accusing me of cheating, which he said didn't matter because I still shouldn't have looked. And the next few weeks were hell, where I thought about leaving but I was 5 months pregnant and exhausted and kept hoping we could fix it. And eventually Remy apologized, said he talked to his friends, said he shut down the chat, said he believed me when I said I never cheated and that he'd just been stressed about becoming a dad and his mind went somewhere dark. And I wanted to believe him so badly that I tried. And things stayed tense, but we were trying. We even went to one couples counseling session that was awkward but felt like progress. He became more affectionate again, came to an ultrasound appointment and held my hand, and I remember thinking maybe we were going to be okay. Until the 4th of July. Because his family does a huge barbecue every year at his parents' house with their big backyard and pool, and Valerie going all out with decorations and food. And I'd been to 3 before, with last year actually being fun, where we played cornhole and his uncle told embarrassing childhood stories about Remy and I felt included. But this year, Valerie barely looked at me when we arrived, and Chelsea was acting strange too, watching me and whispering to her friends, and I told myself I was just paranoid because of everything that had happened. And then about 2 hours in, after most people had eaten and were drinking and talking, Remy stood up on the back porch steps like he was giving a toast. Someone even whistled, people gathered around, and with a beer in his hand and a look on his face I didn't recognize, he said he had an announcement, started talking about honesty and family and what it means to be a man. Said he wasn't going to let anyone make a fool out of him or trap him into something that wasn't real. And then he looked straight at me in my maternity dress with my 7-month belly while 50 people stared, and said he was getting a DNA test as soon as the baby was born because he deserved to know the truth about whether this kid was even his, since everyone knows I'm that type of girl. The silence only lasted about 2 seconds before his mom Valerie stood up from her lawn chair, walked over, hugged Remy, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear that she was so proud of him for standing up for himself and not letting me trap him the way his father had been trapped. A statement I didn't even understand at first. While Franklin stood by the grill with his face completely blank and no one explained anything or asked questions. And then Remy's drunk uncle started slow clapping, actually slow clapping like we were in a movie, and a few other people joined in. Not everyone, but enough. Enough people clapping while my boyfriend publicly accused me of being a cheater and a liar and questioned the paternity of our baby. And I couldn't move. I literally could not make my legs work. I just stood there with my hands on my belly while people stared and whispered and some of them clapped. And Remy stood there on the steps looking satisfied and proud like he'd done something brave. While Chelsea had her phone out filming and told someone next to her that she was getting this for the family group chat. Meaning my face, my reaction, my humiliation was being recorded for their entertainment. And I finally managed to turn around and walk toward the house because I needed to get away and find my keys and leave. But 3 of Remy's friends came in through the back door and cornered me in the kitchen. Justin Bradford, who I'd actually thought was decent, and another guy whose name I don't even know, and they blocked the doorway and started calling me every name you can imagine, saying I was disgusting, that I ruined Remy's life, that everyone knew what I was and it was only a matter of time before I got exposed. And I kept trying to get past them, but they wouldn't move. They just kept talking and insulting me while I could hear their girlfriends laughing in the hallway like this was entertainment. Until I finally pushed past Bradford and ran to the front door, my hands shaking so badly that I dropped my keys twice. And then I got in my car and drove the 20 minutes to my parents' house without really remembering the drive. Just arriving and my mom opening the door and me collapsing into her arms. And since then I've had 33 unread messages from Remy, starting with anger about how I embarrassed him by leaving and how I proved his point by running away. Then shifting into confusion about why I wasn't responding. Then desperation with please just answer and we didn't mean it and I need to talk to you over and over, mixed with calls I keep sending to voicemail. While his mom texted me twice. First telling me I should be ashamed of myself for lying to her son, and then yesterday telling me to stop being dramatic and come talk this out like an adult. And Chelsea posted an Instagram story clearly about me with something about snakes and karma and the truth always coming out. And I am 7 months pregnant. I have never cheated. I have offered this man every password, every location, every piece of access to my entire life. And he still stood in front of 50 people and called me a liar. His family clapped. His friends cornered me. Someone destroyed my car. And now he wants me to answer his texts like none of this happened. And I don't even know what I'm asking for. I just needed to tell someone and write it out because every time I try to say it out loud I start crying and can't finish. And my parents are being incredible, but I can see how worried they are and I don't want to keep dumping this on them. And my friends are furious and keep telling me to never speak to him again. But I'm having his baby in 2 months and I don't know how you never speak to someone you're supposed to co-parent with. So I don't know what to do or how to respond to 33 messages from someone who humiliated me in front of everyone he knows. Or how to co-parent with a man whose mother thinks I'm a trap. Or how to someday explain to my child that their father announced to 50 people that they might not be his. And I'm just so tired and so pregnant and so confused about how I ended up here. And for anyone asking about what Valerie meant by Franklin being trapped, I don't know, because Remy never mentioned anything about his dad and I never asked since it felt like family business. But reading these comments makes me realize there's probably a lot about this family I don't know. And for those asking about the co-workers in the poll, yes, I work with men. Yes, I've mentioned them to Remy in passing like a normal person talking about their day. No, nothing has ever happened with any of them. One of them, named Harold, is literally married with 3 kids and we've maybe spoken 10 times in 2 years. And the fact that Remy turned that into proof of an affair is insane. And I'll update if anything changes. But right now I'm just trying to breathe. Update. It's been 5 days since my original post. And I honestly don't even know where to start because so much has happened and I've been trying to process all of it while also being 7.5 months pregnant. Exhausted, emotional, and completely done with everything. But first I want to say thank you to everyone who commented and messaged me because I read every single one. Some of you made me cry in a good way. Some of you made me laugh when I really needed it. And a few of you gave me advice that I actually used. Especially the person who said I needed to stop letting Remy control the narrative, because that comment lived in my head rent-free for 3 days and genuinely changed how I handled everything that came next. So here's what happened after I posted. I was lying in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling when I realized I had 2 choices. Either I could keep hiding at my parents' house, ignoring Remy's messages and letting him spin whatever story he wanted to his family and friends, or I could face this head-on and force him to explain himself to my face. Not over text where he could carefully craft responses and manipulate the conversation, but in person where I could see his expressions and call him out in real time. So I sent him one message saying I would meet him to talk, but only somewhere neutral, and I was bringing my mom. And within 30 seconds he started calling non-stop, but I didn't answer and instead texted again saying if he couldn't agree to those terms then there was nothing to discuss. And he reluctantly agreed after trying to negotiate for it to be just us and saying my mom didn't need to be involved and that this was between him and me. And I told him he made it everyone's business when he announced it to 50 people, so he didn't get to decide who was involved anymore. And he went silent for about 2 hours before finally agreeing to meet at a diner near my parents' house. And the meeting was 3 days ago on Saturday afternoon. My mom and I got there first and sat in a booth near the back. I was so nervous I thought I might throw up, which honestly could have just been pregnancy nausea, but the timing felt suspicious. And my mom held my hand under the table and reminded me that I hadn't done anything wrong and didn't owe him apologies or explanations. And Remy showed up about 10 minutes late, which felt intentional, like he wanted us to wait. And he immediately started talking. Before I could say anything, going on about how I ran away, how I left him looking stupid, how I never gave him a chance to explain. And I could feel my mom's grip tighten as she held herself back. And I let him finish his speech about how hurt he was before asking him one simple question. Asking him to explain to me face to face what actual evidence he had that I ever cheated on him. Not feelings or vibes, but real evidence. And he started fidgeting with the sugar packets on the table. Couldn't look me in the eye, and said it wasn't about evidence but patterns. And when I asked what patterns, he said I'd been distant since getting pregnant. And I pointed out that I'd been exhausted, nauseous, and growing a human inside my body, which tends to change a person's energy. And he said I was always on my phone, and I reminded him that I'd literally given him my location and offered him my passwords, and he always knew who I was talking to. And he said it wasn't about what he could prove but about what he felt. And I just stared at him because this man has been telling everyone I know that I'm a cheater based on a feeling. And that's when my mom finally spoke and asked if he understood what he'd done. Not just the accusation but the way he did it. The public humiliation, the family involvement, the group chat poll, and asked if he had any idea what it was like for me to stand in front of 50 people while his mother celebrated calling me a liar. And I watched Remy's face as he tried to come up with a defense and failed, saying his mom was just being supportive. And my mom laughed in that disbelieving way and asked if publicly humiliating the mother of your grandchild was what he called supportive. And that's when he got defensive and raised his voice slightly, saying we didn't understand his family and they'd been through things and his mom had reasons to be protective of him. And I asked what reasons, and when he went quiet I pushed and asked him directly what his mom meant when she said she was proud of him for not letting me trap him like his father got trapped. And what that was actually about. That I asked him why Franklin looked like he wanted to disappear when Valerie said that. And Remy didn't want to answer at first, kept saying it was family stuff, not relevant, that I was deflecting from the real issue, and I told him no, this actually was the real issue because his mother clearly had some kind of history she was projecting onto me, and if I was being accused of trapping him, then I deserved to know where that accusation was coming from. And that's when he finally told me that apparently when Valerie and Franklin got married she was already pregnant with Remy and she'd been convinced Franklin was going to leave her. So she got pregnant on purpose to keep him. Her own words. Something she admitted years ago during a family fight that then became this unspoken truth everyone just lived around. And Franklin stayed out of obligation, not love. And their marriage has been miserable for decades, and Remy grew up watching his parents barely tolerate each other while his mom constantly warned him that women would try to trap him the same way she trapped his dad. Which honestly made my brain short-circuit because this woman baby trapped her husband, manipulated her way into a marriage, and then spent years projecting her own actions onto me, poisoning Remy against me from the start, convinced I had to be doing the same thing because in her worldview that's just what women do. And when I asked if she'd said specific things about me, Remy tried to minimize it but eventually admitted that yes. She'd been making comments since I got pregnant about how convenient it was that it happened right when we were getting more serious, about how she'd seen girls like me before and I had an agenda, about how Remy needed to protect himself before it was too late, and the part that makes me want to scream forever is that Remy believed her. He let his mother, who he knows, trapped his own father, convince him I was doing the same thing, never stopping to think that maybe she had issues around this topic or that maybe her word shouldn't be treated as gospel when judging the woman carrying his child. And my mom asked him directly if he thought she'd raised a liar, if he thought I'd been brought up to manipulate and deceive, and he said no, he didn't think that, he just got confused because there were voices in his ear telling him different things, and my mom told him those voices were his choice, that he was a grown man who chose to believe gossip and projection over the woman carrying his baby. And that's when he started getting emotional, saying he knew he messed up and didn't know how to fix it. And I asked if he truly believed now that I never cheated and he said yes. And when I asked why he said because looking at me and seeing how hurt I was he knew I wouldn't fake that, which honestly made me want to throw my drink in his face because apparently I had to be completely destroyed for him to believe me. And I asked about the group chat, the poll, his friends cornering me in the kitchen calling me names while their girlfriends laughed. And he said he'd talked to them and told them it was a misunderstanding and to back off. And when I asked if any of them had apologized to me he didn't answer, which told me everything. And when I asked about Hank, his own brother who voted in a poll about sleeping with me and joked about hitting that, Remy said Hank felt bad and it was just guy humor that went too far. And I told him there was nothing funny about accusing the mother of your brother's child of cheating or voting on which man she supposedly slept with, that it was sick behavior from grown adults. But he kept trying to explain and give context and say things got out of hand and nobody really meant it, and I told him that was exactly the problem because he never meant any of it but he still did all of it. He never really thought I cheated but he still told everyone I did. He never wanted to hurt me but he still stood on those steps and publicly destroyed me. And when I finally asked what he thought happened now, whether he expected me to come back and play house after all this, he said he hoped we could work through it because we were having a baby and he'd do whatever it took to earn back my trust. So I asked if he was willing to stand up at the next family gathering and announce that he was wrong, that I never cheated, that his accusations were baseless and cruel, and that everyone who participated in humiliating me owed me an apology, and his face went pale as he started saying maybe it would be better to let it blow over, that making another scene would be awkward, that people would move on and forget that I told him absolutely not and made it clear he didn't get to publicly accuse me and then privately apologize, because if there was ever going to be a chance at healthy co-parenting, let alone any kind of relationship, he needed to correct the record with the same energy he used to destroy it. His family needed to know the truth, his friends needed to know, and everyone at that barbecue needed to know they clapped for a lie, and when he said he'd think about it, which in Remy language means he doesn't want to do it but won't say no outright. We left the diner with nothing resolved. He tried to hug me and I stepped back, and he looked hurt by that in a way that's almost darkly funny considering he destroyed my reputation, my car, and my sense of safety, and now he's hurt I won't hug him. And then things somehow got even messier because Chelsea, his sister, apparently saw my original Reddit post. I don't know how, but she recognized it was me and texted me not to apologize for filming my humiliation at the barbecue or for her snakes and karma Instagram story, but to tell me I had no right to air family business online and that I was making things worse by seeking attention from strangers. Instead of handling it privately, and I didn't respond nicely because I reminded her she filmed me first, posted about me first, and violated my privacy for content, and that I only posted because her family gave me nowhere else to turn. And she replied with a whole paragraph accusing me of playing the victim, saying I probably did cheat and was just good at hiding it, and that Remy deserved better than someone who runs to the internet for sympathy, which I screenshot and sent to Remy with the message that this was his sister and his family and asking if he really expected me to believe they'd ever accept me or my child. And he called immediately, but I let it go to voicemail where he made excuses again, saying Chelsea was just being protective and everyone was on edge. Always a justification for their behavior and never accountability. And here's what I've decided. I'm getting my own DNA test the moment this baby is born, not because Remy wants one, but because I want permanent proof. Documentation. I can hold up forever, so when he or his family tries to rewrite history I have undeniable evidence. And I'm going to make sure everyone sees those results. The same 50 people who watched him accuse me will watch me be vindicated. Not to win him back, but for myself and my child, so someday I can show them exactly what happened and what the truth was. And Freya came over yesterday and sat with me for hours feeling guilty for introducing us. But I told her she couldn't have known. Nobody could have known how toxic his family was or how badly he'd fold under their pressure. And now I'm less than 2 months from giving birth when I should be setting up a nursery and packing a hospital bag. But instead I'm thinking about DNA tests, legal options, and how to protect myself from a family that's already decided I'm the villain. While Remy keeps texting asking when we can talk again, saying he wants to be at the birth and be involved even though he still hasn't corrected anything publicly, hasn't made anyone apologize, and hasn't done a single thing to fix what he broke. So I'm taking it one day at a time because that's all I can do. I'll update again when there's more, and to the person who suggested Remy might be projecting his own guilt. Like maybe he cheated and accused me to cover it. I hadn't considered that before, but now I can't stop thinking about it because I didn't have evidence that I cheated either, and look how that turned out. So more updates to come. Please send good vibes because this baby is kicking my ribs non-stop and I think she knows her mom is stressed. And finally, this is the last update, and I need to warn you that it got messy. Like way messier than I ever expected, and I've been sitting on this for almost 2 weeks because I genuinely didn't know how to process everything that happened, let alone type it out for strangers on the internet. But you've all been with me through this nightmare, so you deserve to know how it ended. And first, the good news is that I had my baby, a perfect little girl, 6 pounds 11 ounces, named Ada, who is currently asleep on my chest making tiny snoring sounds and is quite literally the only good thing to come out of this entire disaster, because I love her so much it physically hurts. And now I need to tell you about the absolute circus that led up to her arrival. Because after my last update, Remy kept texting me every single day asking how I was feeling, if I needed anything, if he could come to the next appointment, doing all this attentive boyfriend behavior that might have meant something if he'd bothered to do even one of the things I had actually asked for. But he still hadn't corrected anything publicly, still hadn't made his family apologize, and still seemed to think he could nice guy his way back into my good graces without doing any of the hard work. And about 10 days after the diner meeting he texted saying his mom wanted to meet with me, just her and me, to clear the air before the baby came. Which made me laugh so hard I almost peed myself, a very real risk at 8 months pregnant, because this was the same woman who hugged him while he accused me of cheating, who made that comment about not letting me trap him, who spent months poisoning his brain against me. And now she wanted to clear the air like we'd had some minor disagreement about wedding centerpieces. So I told Remy absolutely not. He pushed back and said I was being difficult and that his mom was extending an olive branch and I should be grateful. Grateful for the opportunity to sit across from the woman who orchestrated my public humiliation. And I told him the only way I'd meet Valerie was if he was there, my mom was there, and it was somewhere public where she couldn't pull any more stunts. And he agreed, though I could tell he thought I was being dramatic. And the meeting happened at a restaurant near my parents' place about a week before my due date. With Valerie showing up dressed like she was going to Sunday service in a prissy floral blouse, full makeup, pearls, and my mom took one look at her and I saw her jaw tighten because she'd been waiting for this. And the first few minutes were painfully awkward with Valerie rearranging things on the table, adjusting her water glass, smoothing her napkin, until my mom finally asked her directly what evidence she had that I'd ever cheated on her son. And Valerie launched into the usual nonsense about intuition and mother's instinct and how I seemed too confident about the pregnancy, which my mom asked her to explain. And Valerie actually said that women who trap men are usually very calm because they've planned the whole thing and that real mothers are nervous and scared, which I couldn't even believe I was hearing because she was saying I wasn't scared enough about becoming a first-time mom, so therefore I must be lying about paternity. And the logic was so twisted I didn't know where to start, but my mom did when she asked Valerie if the real reason she was so convinced I trapped Remy was because that's exactly what she did to Franklin. And the table went dead silent as Remy looked like he wanted to crawl under the floor and Valerie's face cycled through shock, anger, fear, and then this cold, hard defensiveness that honestly scared me. And when she asked Remy if he'd told us about that and he admitted he had, I watched something shift in her eyes like he'd betrayed her by telling the truth about her own actions. And then she turned to me and said she knew exactly what I was. That women like me were everywhere looking for men to latch onto, getting pregnant on purpose to secure our futures, that she'd watched me at family dinners, seen how I looked at Remy like he was a meal ticket, seen how I conveniently got pregnant right when things were getting serious. And when my mom started to respond I stopped her because this was my moment. And I told Valerie that the only person at that table who'd admitted to trapping a man was her. That she'd spent 30 years in a miserable marriage because she manipulated someone into staying. That she'd projected her own guilt onto me. From day one because she couldn't handle the fact that not every woman operates the way she does. And that if she wanted to talk about women who latch onto men for security she should take a long hard look in the mirror. And Valerie's face went red, not embarrassed red but furious red. She turned to Remy and demanded he defend her. Demanded he tell me I couldn't speak to his mother that way. Demanded he choose right then and there whose side he was on, and Remy, for maybe the first time in his entire life, didn't immediately fold, because he told his mom she'd been out of line, that she'd encouraged his suspicions when she should have helped him think clearly, that he'd humiliated the mother of his child in front of everyone they knew because he listened to her instead of trusting me, and Valerie looked at him like he'd physically hit her before standing up from the table and telling him that when this all fell apart, when I took his money and his child and disappeared, he shouldn't come crying to her because she'd warned him. And then she grabbed her purse and walked out of the restaurant without looking back, leaving Remy sitting there staring at the door she'd gone through for a long moment before saying he was sorry again like that word meant anything anymore. And I told him sorry wasn't enough, that his mother had made it crystal clear she would never accept me or my child, that the family he kept promising would come around was actively hostile, and that he needed to figure out what that meant for his future because I wasn't going to spend my life fighting for basic respect from people who'd already decided I was the enemy. And he didn't have an answer. And we left the restaurant and I didn't hear from him for 2 days. And then I went into labor, early Wednesday morning around 4 a.m., waking up to contractions that felt different from the practice ones. With my mom driving me to the hospital while I texted Remy from the car because no matter what he was still this baby's father and had a right to be there. And he showed up within an hour looking like he'd run every red light to get there. And the labor was long and brutal and there were about 14 hours where I genuinely thought I might not survive it. With my mom on one side and Remy on the other until the drama faded and all that mattered was getting through each contraction. And when Ada finally arrived and they put her on my chest everything else disappeared. Because she was tiny and perfect and loud, screaming like she was already mad at the world, and Remy was crying, full sobbing, touching her face and hands and saying she was beautiful, and she looked just like me. And for 10 minutes I let myself live in that bubble of just me, my daughter, and her father, until Valerie showed up, walking into my hospital room about 2 hours after I'd given birth, exhausted and sore and emotional, with this triumphant look like she was there to claim something, going straight to the bassinet and reaching for Ada until I said no loudly enough that the nurse stepped between her and the baby. And Valerie acted offended and said she had every right to meet her granddaughter. And I told her she lost that right when she encouraged her son to accuse me publicly, hugged him for humiliating me, and walked out of a restaurant after calling me a gold digger. And she turned to Remy expecting him to override me, and instead he told her she needed to leave, shocking her completely as he said I'd just given birth and I got to decide who was in the room. And she left only after telling me this wasn't over and that I hadn't fooled her and she'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. And the next few days in the hospital were tense with Remy, helping as much as he could while his phone buzzed non-stop with messages he wouldn't show me. And Chelsea came by once and I refused to let her in, leading to an argument in the hallway loud enough that a nurse had to tell them to quiet down. When I got discharged and went back to my parents' house with Ada, I honestly thought things might finally calm down. But I was wrong, because 5 days after she was born the DNA test results came back. The test I'd arranged myself through an official lab, because I wanted documentation no one could dispute, and it showed a 99.98% probability that Remy was the father, which was obvious to me because I never cheated. There was never anyone else, and this entire nightmare was built on lies, projection, and a toxic family's refusal to mind their own business. So I sent Remy the results and he replied with a long message apologizing again, saying he knew now that he'd been wrong and that he wanted to make things right. And I told him that if he actually wanted to make things right then he needed to share those results with everyone who had heard his accusations. His family, his friends, everyone at that barbecue who clapped when he called me a liar, and he said he would. But then Valerie completely lost her mind, and I found out later from Remy that when he went to his parents' house to show them the DNA results and ask for apologies, Valerie refused to accept them, said DNA tests could be faked, said I probably knew someone who worked at a lab, said the results proved nothing except that I was good at covering my tracks, and Franklin, who had been mostly silent through all of this, finally snapped and told her she was being insane, that she'd spent 30 years making everyone around her miserable because of her own guilt and he wasn't going to watch her do the same thing to their son, that she needed to accept she was wrong and apologize or she was going to lose Remy and her grandchild, and Valerie screamed at him that he was only defending me because he wished he'd never married her, that he'd spent their whole marriage looking for an escape and now he was using me as an excuse, that she'd given him everything including Remy and this was how he repaid her, and Franklin told her that trapping him wasn't giving him everything, it was taking his choice away, and that watching her try to convince Remy I'd done the same thing made him realize he couldn't stay quiet anymore, and the fight blew up completely. Chelsea took Valerie's side, Hank stayed out of it, and Remy left his childhood home that night with his dad telling him he was proud of him for standing up for his family and his mom telling him he was dead to her own son, because he believed DNA evidence over her paranoid conspiracy theories. And 3 days ago someone keyed liar into my parents' mailbox. And while we don't have proof it was anyone from Remy's family, the timing feels obvious enough that my dad filed a police report and installed a camera on the porch, and where that leaves things now is that Remy and I are not together and I don't know if we ever will be. But he comes over every day to see Ada and is genuinely good with her. Patient, gentle, completely in love with his daughter. And when I watch him hold her I can still see the person I fell for before everything went wrong even though I can't forget what he did. And Ada just woke up and is looking at me with these big eyes like she's trying to figure out who I am. And she doesn't know any of this. She doesn't know her grandmother doubts her legitimacy. She doesn't know her father accused her mother of cheating in front of 50 people. She doesn't know about group chats or keyed property or screaming fights. All she knows is that she's warm and fed and safe in someone's arms. And I'm going to make sure it stays that way. Because whatever happens with Remy and whatever happens with his toxic family, my daughter is going to grow up knowing she was wanted and loved and believed. And she's never going to wonder if her mother stood up for herself because I have receipts and Reddit posts and DNA results that show exactly what happened. And thank you to everyone who followed this from the beginning, because you kept me sane through the worst months of my life.